Hey guys, Hop here. Something we've talked about before on this channel is the concept of a universal suppressor. One suppressor that you can buy, pay one tax stamp for, suffer through one waiting period for, and then use on almost all of your guns, or potentially all of your guns if you're really going to commit to it. I don't remember exactly what my advice was on the subject, but I think it boils down to don't. However, this is a 30 caliber suppressor on a 5.56 rifle, which we are using to interrogate the concept of universal suppressors. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the idea of universal or near universal suppressors as an alternative to buying one can for every specific gun that you want to suppress. We're going to see if there is a person out there who is best suited by just buying one suppressor and being done with it completely. All right, let's go for it.
Today's video was made possible in part by our sponsor, Blue Alpha. I have been wearing a Blue Alpha hybrid EDC belt every day for the last 5 years, and at this point I'm starting to think it's probably indestructible. If you're in the market for a rigid EDC gun belt or a 2-layer battle belt or duty belt setup, check out Blue Alpha in the video description. They also have magazine pouches, dump pouches, and rifle slings, and all of their stuff is made in the United States. A big thank you to Blue Alpha for being a supporter of this channel. Thank you guys very much for watching and watching the advertisement, and let's get back into the show. So the advice that I usually give for somebody shopping for a suppressor is that you should start with a dedicated suppressor for your primary fighting rifle. The one that you treat the most seriously, the one that you put all your best parts on, the one that you practice with, the one that you think may in fact save your life someday. For most guys, that's probably an AR-15 in 5.56, so you should get a dedicated 5.56 suppressor because that's going to give you the best performance. The idea of a universal suppressor mostly appeals to like guys that have a lot of guns and would like to suppress all of them, but they're not quite so invested that they want to buy a specific suppressor for each individual gun. Obviously, you're not going to be maximizing the performance on any of those platforms. Oh my god, dude, I spent so long setting those up. As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, you're not going to maximize the performance on any of those hosts by buying one suppressor that fits everything. What that usually means is buying a handgun suppressor that's like beefed up such that it can handle rifle calibers, because handgun bore size is of course quite a lot larger. So maybe that's a 9mm suppressor that you put on everything from 9mm and below, which means, you know, 308, 300 blackout, 5.56, etc. Some people take it to the logical extreme and they buy a 46 caliber suppressor, which can be used on everything. 4570, 45 ACP, 308, 300 blackout, 5.56, whatever. Ah, my god, I gotta fix the fucking suppressor diorama. So the main reason not to do this is that you're sacrificing performance on most of these calibers, like especially if you go with the 46 caliber route. The bore size is now so large that it's almost not suppressing the 5.56 at all. The purpose and design of a suppressor is to trap expanding gases, and if there's so much room that the gases can just follow along with the bullet all the way out the exit of the suppressor, you're going to lose a lot of performance, not just in sound suppression, but also in flash suppression. So I've experienced this before, because I bought a YHM Resonator K, which is a 30 caliber K suppressor. Fine, sit there, that's fine. And I also bought a YHM R9, which is a 9mm, it's more of a subgun suppressor than anything. Theoretically, these cans should be, you know, decent at suppressing a variety of different hosts. The Resonator K is an extremely beefy, durable can, so you can put it on like short barrel 5.56. The R9 is not, it's more of a subgun suppressor, but it also can be put on a handgun, even though it's a little bit unwieldy. And it's technically usable on 5.56, 308, stuff like that. However, the design means that it has more severe barrel restrictions than the Resonator K. I used them for a while on a couple of different sub-caliber hosts, and then realized, yeah, this is basically a waste of time. Like, the suppression effect that I'm getting is not really anything special, so the cans are just relegated to what they were supposed to be used for originally. The R9 is a subgun can. That's all I'm ever going to use it for. I can't even get the pistol mount on it anymore because the SRX mount is frozen to the can. The Resonator K is kind of like a Sandman K. If you put it on a 5.56 rifle, it does literally nothing. It creates massive fireballs, barely suppresses the gun. It's kind of a waste of time. And before you say, hey Hop, how come you didn't follow your own advice? Well, I did, actually. My first suppressor was a Gemtech Trek 2, which is a direct thread 5.56 suppressor, extremely dedicated. So dedicated that you can't even use it on multiple 5.56 guns, because taking it off requires tools and you don't have a quick detach mount. So, is there any sort of use case for the universal suppressor? Well, obviously, budget is one of those things. If you really do have a lot of guns you want to suppress, but you don't want to spend very much money on multiple suppressors, then, okay, now my cans are leaving. You tilted it. So now we just don't get to look at anything then. Is that what it is? Okay, so universal suppressor. Maybe it makes sense if you're the guy that has a bunch of different hosts in different calibers, but you also don't want to spend that much money on suppressors. Suppressors are very expensive. Ballpark $500 to $1,000 for each can, plus $200 tax stamp. The one thing that makes this idea kind of work is that 5.56 doesn't really suppress that well to begin with. Suppressed 5.56, even with a very high-performance dedicated 5.56 suppressor, is still very loud, so you have to wear hearing protection when you're shooting it anyway. Yeah, it is more pleasant, and you do get all the benefits of signature reduction, which can be very useful in a tactical situation, but also can just be a nice, pleasant thing to do at the range. Shooting a suppressed gun is a lot nicer to your brain and ears, a lot worse for your lungs. That's another thing to talk about some other time. But I do understand the argument coming from guys who are not extremely tactically minded that chasing performance on a 5.56 host is kind of a waste of time.
Thumpy. No! My resale value!
Okay, so what if you're that guy with multiple hosts, different calibers that you want to suppress, but you don't want to invest in a massive pile of suppressors? The one thing you should definitely not do is buy a 30 cal K can, like a YHM Resonator K or a Dead Air Sandman K. I know why you want to do that. It's because you probably have a 16-inch barreled AR, and the idea of hanging a long, heavy 30 caliber can off the end of it is sort of like horrifying to you. But remember, in this scenario, that is not the primary purpose of your suppressor. That's something that you might do sometimes, or maybe you just won't bother. Maybe you leave the can off pretty much all the time. In that case, okay, maybe you can focus on suppressing other hosts, stuff that actually feels a little bit more worthwhile to suppress. For example, 308 bolt-action hunting rifle. Now that's the sort of thing you might want to suppress so that you can go hunting and not feel so bad about not wearing your ear pro. It's still loud, it's still bad for you, but you're only taking like what, 1 to 2 shots, maybe, without hearing protection. Not a big deal when you shoot your 5.56 rifle at the indoor range, or when you're doing a high volume course of fire or some sort of like training program. Well, hey, you're wearing hearing protection anyway, suppressed, unsuppressed, kind of the same thing. I think something very similar applies if you're really into 300 blackout or like sub-gun setups. 300 blackout suppresses wonderfully. It's extremely cool to shoot suppressed 300 blackout. So maybe that's like your dedicated suppressed gun, and then your 5.56 gun maybe has a longer barrel, maybe has a scope on it, maybe you're not really worried about putting a suppressor on that all the time. It's just a nice option to be able to have. So you can cover a decent amount of bases with a full-size 30 caliber suppressor. The one that I have right here is from Wolfpack Armory. It's the Disruptor 30. They sent me the 30 cal version and the 5.56 to play around with. The brown 5.56 one has some burnt glove on it, because something I find extremely funny is to dry the moisture out of my gloves by grabbing a hot suppressor. Brassfax hates it, but I do it anyway. So the Wolfpack Disruptor suppressors are kind of like classic high back pressure suppressors. Nothing really groundbreaking. The nice thing about them is that they come with Wolfpack's muzzle devices and Plan B compatible mounts, which are a pretty nice value add because a lot of people are going to be switching to that stuff anyway. The Disruptor 30 is similar in a lot of ways to a YHM Resonator R2, which is the full-size 30 cal can that YHM makes, or the medium-length version of the Aero Precision Lahar. That's a 30 caliber suppressor. The Wolfpack Disruptors, as well as the Lahars, have swappable end caps. The version of the Disruptor 30 that I've got prototype, pre-production, it does not have the swappable end cap. The 5.56 one does. That is something that they're, I guess, doing now on all the cans. Swappable end caps is something that often comes up and is brought up in defense of the idea of the universal suppressor. Like, hey, I'll buy the 30 caliber can and then I'll swap it over to a 5.56 end cap when I run it on a 5.56 gun, and that will improve the performance. And that is true. It will slightly improve the performance, but first of all, swapping the end caps is a big pain in the ass, and I don't think you're going to do it. So a lot of the times what that means is somebody buys a 30 cal can, realizes they're only going to suppress 5.56, and then they put a 5.56 end cap on it, leave it there permanently. Well, now you've got kind of a gimped can. But what's a lot more likely to happen is that you shoot the can enough that the end cap just becomes completely carbon locked on, and it's just a 30 cal suppressor until the end of time. I'm currently using the Disruptor 30 as the suppressor on my PSAK 104. I also used it a little bit on a 5.56 rifle and compared it directly to their 5.56 Disruptor K. I think this makes a pretty good point of comparison. If you wanted to buy a dedicated 5.56 suppressor, then the Disruptor 5.56K would be your better option, especially if you have something like a 16-inch barrel. If you've got something really, really short, I don't think you need to go with a K-can. The K-can mostly has a place on longer, heavier guns, and you want to try to minimize the impact the suppressor has on weight and handling characteristics. So I compared these two suppressors against each other, mounted to the same host. One of them was a 16-inch rifle. The other one is an 11.5. It would require fancy measuring equipment to determine the difference in sound performance between the two, But there's an obvious difference in flash performance. The 30 caliber suppressor, even though it's longer and has more baffles, exhibits significant first round pop and a little bit of flash on every subsequent shot. The dedicated 5.56 version does a lot better on flash, even without any kind of fancy flash mitigating end cap design. So buying a 30 cal universal suppressor does get my tentative seal of approval in very limited situations, and also, of course, the selection of the suppressor does matter. All right, so what about universal suppressors that can be used on everything from pistol calibers all the way down to 5.56? I'm going to draw the line there. A lot of these universal suppressors, like 36 caliber suppressor, which can handle anything from 9mm on down, or 46 caliber suppressors that handle 45 on down. As far as I understand, they have some serious design compromises, not just in performance, but also in limitations surrounding their use. For example, the YHM R9, it's a 9mm can primarily designed as a subgun suppressor. Technically, it can be used on a handgun, and technically it can be used on, 308, 5.56, 300 blackout, all of those things. The design of the baffle stack on the R9 is not nearly as beefy as YHM's rifle cans like the Turbo and the Resonator, so it can't handle short barrels like they can. The minimum barrel length restrictions for the Turbo and the Resonator are, I think, the same, so like 10-inch barrel, 5.56, 7-inch barrel, 300 blackout, but the R9 has a substantially lower pain tolerance. Minimum barrel length for 5.56 with the R9 is 16 inches. So if I'm the kind of dude who mostly wants to suppress a pistol caliber carbine, maybe a 300 blackout, maybe occasionally a full-length 308 hunting rifle, and then very, very sparingly a 16-inch 5.56 AR, then the R9 would be a good buy. I will grant you that that's a pretty small slice of the population. Now, if I'm willing to dedicate suppressors to very specific tasks, the R9 kicks ass as a subgun can and a 300 blackout subsonic can. But that's only like 1.5 hosts tops. The universal suppressor idea is just not going to excel at everything. I guess the last thing I can say potentially in favor of the idea of the overboard universal suppressor idea is that it does have some odd fringe benefits if you run it on a 5.56. Essentially, less gas blowback and less tuning required. Obviously, that's not much of a selling point. High back pressure suppressors, even if they're overboard, are still going to gas you out on longer strings of fire. You just might find them a little bit more tolerable on a gun with no tuning, i.e. no gas deflecting charging handle, no adjustable gas system. Anyway, I hope that was useful, food for thought. Buying a universal suppressor and not hating your life afterwards is going to require a lot more research than just buying one can for every gun, but it will save you quite a lot of money, so maybe it's worth it. Speaking for myself, I really enjoy having an SBR with a dedicated high-performance 5.56 suppressor. I think it's pretty sick. But if I was the kind of guy who wasn't going to be doing any of that shit, I could probably go ahead and just live with an unsuppressed full-length 5.56 gun and spend a lot more time shooting other suppressed calibers that are more enjoyable. 147 grain 9mm through a suppressor is really delightful. Same thing with 300 blackout subsonic. Suppressing a short 5.56 gives you some of those warm fuzzies like, oh, I'm a little more deadly in the mountains, people at the indoor range don't hate me as much. But no one has ever shot a suppressed 5.56 rifle and then giggled because of how quiet it was. I think the highest praise I've ever heard from somebody having shot one of my suppressed 5.56 guns was, that wasn't as bad as I thought. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. This was very long, very rambly. My cat tried his damnedest to ruin it, but that's okay because I already didn't love him. If you'd like to support the channel, check out the links in the video description. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I will see you next time.